Hello, welcome to another hour at the Golden Hour, which is a chance for you and me to work together for an hour doing whatever. So I hope whenever you're coming to this video, that you are doing well, that you're getting a chance to sit down and focus on something that you would like to accomplish and focus for an hour, which is a good chunk of time. So, I have made myself hot chocolate here, essential for focus. I just grabbed a tiny plate as a coaster. So, hopefully we're set up for success here. So, I'm going to continue to review Sapiens. Like I said, I had like I said yesterday, I had a big chunk of pages that I needed to go through. Just because I had been away for so long. I didn't read a ton over my break, but, more than I do in a day. Whoops, no, that's my most recent bookmark. So let me pick up, where we left off, which was the Wheels of Industry. So let me see if I can uncrowd myself a little bit here. Okay, because I want the microphone nearby, but I also want to be able to see the book. Okay, so let's just read what I've underlined and see what we talk about from that. All right, chapter 17 is called The Wheels of Industry. He says, the modern economy grows thanks to our trust in the future and to the willingness of capitalists to reinvest their profits in production. Yet that does not suffice. Economic growth also requires energy and raw materials, and these are finite. When and if they run out, the entire system will collapse. He's saying, but the evidence provided by the past is that they are finite only in theory. Counterintuitively, while humankind's use of energy and raw materials has mushroomed in the last few centuries, the amounts available for our exploitation have actually increased. Whenever a shortage of either has threatened to slow economic growth, investments have flowed into scientific and technological research. These have invariably produced not only more efficient ways of exploiting existing resources, but also completely new types of energy and materials. This is going to be one of his arguments about the Industrial Revolution, that it provided cheap and abundant energy and materials. Talking about revolution in the vehicle industry, and then saying a similar revolution has swept almost all other fields of industry. We call it the Industrial Revolution. Talking about since human and animal bodies were the only energy conversion device available, muscle power was the key to almost all human activities. Human history was consequently dominated by two main cycles, the growth cycles of plants and the changing cycles of solar energy, day and night, summer and winter. And I was noting, yes, it's very natural world and out of our control oriented. Okay. As he's saying in a different section, throughout these long millennia, day in and day out, people stood face to face with the most important invention in the history of energy production and failed to notice it. It stared them in the eye every time a housewife or servant put up a kettle to boil water for tea or put a pot full of potatoes on the stove. The minute the water boiled, the lid of the kettle or the pot jumped. That certainly makes me wonder, oh my gosh, what else might we be staring in the face of? He also mentions about 600 years passed between the invention of gunpowder and the development of effective artillery. What else is staring us in the face today? Honestly, one of my particular things that I tend to harp on, I think, is things related to consciousness. I feel like that's staring us in the face. And it just might be a lot of time might pass before we tap into that. think he's talking about Britain and railway tracks. Henceforth, people became obsessed with the idea that machines and engines could be used to convert one type of energy into another. Any type of energy, anywhere in the world, might be harnessed to whatever need we had if we could just invent the right machine. His next section is called An Ocean of Energy, and the first sentence says, "At heart, the Industrial Revolution has been a revolution in energy conversion." And I noted, funny, I tend to think of it as a revolution in the way we work. I don't know that those things need to be contradictory. One thing leads to another. When you free up when your muscle power is no longer needed, you start to work in a different way. He also says, every few decades we discover a new energy source so that the sum total of energy at our disposal just keeps growing. And I ask, but does having more energy mean we are limitless? You know what I mean? Like, that may be the case, but I don't know that that solves all our problems or makes us unstoppable. Let's see. Top of the next page says, learning how to harness and convert energy effectively. Learning how to harness and convert energy effectively solved the other problem that slows economic growth, the scarcity of raw materials. As humans worked out how to harness large quantities of cheap energy, they could begin exploiting previously inaccessible deposits of raw materials. For example, mining iron in the Siberian wastelands. The next section is called Life on the Conveyor Belt. It starts saying, the Industrial Revolution yielded an unprecedented combination of cheap and abundant energy and cheap and abundant raw materials. The result was an explosion in human productivity. Yeah, and I said, okay, now we're getting to the revolution of work. Helpful for me to see what caused that. He's talking about even plants and animals becoming mechanized. And I was noting it makes sense that we would apply help to our daily survival work that took all of our time. Yeah, it's not a surprise to me that we began to harness this energy for the work we were doing to make our lives easier and to help out. And that work we were doing was so closely tied to survival. That's, just a double whammy. Oh, wow, I've got a better chance at survival with these machines, and it frees me up. So, yeah, it makes sense to me. And he is talking some here about industrial agriculture. Treating living creatures possessing complex emotional worlds as if they were machines is likely to cause them not only physical discomfort, but also much social stress and psychological frustration. Just as the Atlantic slave trade did not stem from hatred towards Africans, so the modern animal industry is not motivated by animosity. Again, it is fueled by indifference. So I find some of his observations very convicting. I find that true. I think I may have mentioned this in another stream. It may have been yesterday's. Realizing you think you're living a good life and you're a good person, and you are, but you're also participating in systems that when you think about them, you disapprove of. And I find myself in that position in terms of there's nothing about industrial farming that I like, industrial agriculture. And yet I find myself a participant in that system. So, yeah, so the thing that keeps that going is my, if not indifference, at this point, now that anyone who becomes aware of the industrial agricultural system, is probably no longer indifferent, but just, wants to ignore it. The next page mentions this is the basic lesson of evolutionary psychology. A need shaped in the wild continues to be felt subjectively, even if it is no longer really necessary for survival and reproduction. The tragedy of industrial agriculture is that it takes great care of the objective needs of animals while neglecting their subjective needs. And I wrote, same could be said for humans in some ways. We suffer as we lack expression of natural evolutionary behaviors. So yeah, as our society, I would say has become less communal, that desire, that need shaped in the wild is still within us, even though our basic needs are taken care of without a community. I don't have to live in communities to survive, but we have that need inside of us, And we suffer when it's not met. Yes, to hot chocolate. Talking about an experiment by Harry Harlow with monkeys giving... So, yes. The conclusion was inescapable. Monkeys must have psychological needs and desires that go beyond their material requirements. And if these are not fulfilled, they will suffer greatly. Yeah, and I just kind of made a similar note as I was just talking about. I wonder a bit here if humans aren't suffering a bit from reduced family influence and less community/communal living. Skipping to the next page, without the industrialization of agriculture, the urban industrial revolution could never have taken place. There would not have been enough hands and brains to staff factories and offices. Yeah, so that was when I was recapping my notes yesterday, where I was talking about, it's sort of fascinating to think we let loose from the fields all these sorts of professions we think of today. When you're not in the field, you can be an accountant or a physicist or things like that. Or certainly you won't be as rare as perhaps those people were in the past that needed other people to prop them up in order for them to do that work. As those factories and offices absorbed the billions of hands and brains that were released from field work, they began pouring out an unprecedented avalanche of products, and I added, and ideas. For the first time in human history, supply began to outstrip demand, and an entirely new problem was born. Who is going to buy all this stuff? And I noted, it's like sugar. We're primed by evolutionary scarcity. We'll want it. So, yeah, I tend to think that about our surpluses today of food and of things. We're so primed to want them that it's like, oh, we'll keep taking it. No one needs to make a link between that statement and my hot chocolate. Thank you very much. The age of shopping is the next section. The modern capitalist economy must constantly increase production if it is to survive, like a shark that must swim or suffocate. And I just wrote, maybe we could maintain. Please. Could that possibly be a possibility? Okay. Then I wrote this note that says, this makes it sound like a conspiracy. It's just an outgrowth of our desires, which I can see feeds on itself. So let's see what he said. Most people throughout history lived under conditions of scarcity. Frugality was thus their watchword. The austere ethics of the Puritans and Spartans are but two famous examples. A good person avoided luxuries, never threw food away, and patched up torn trousers instead of buying a new pair. Only kings and nobles allowed themselves to renounce such values publicly and conspicuously flaunt their riches. Wait, that might not have been what I was talking about. Let's see. Above that, when he started, the modern capitalist economy must constantly increase production if it is to survive, like a shark that must swim or suffocate. Yet it's not enough just to produce. Somebody must also buy the products, or industrialists and investors alike will go bust. to prevent this catastrophe and to make sure that people will always buy whatever new stuff industry produces. A new kind of ethic appeared, consumerism. Okay, that's what I was talking about, where I was saying, well, this makes it sound like a conspiracy. And I was saying it's just an outgrowth of our desires. Sure, yes, if you're going to produce things, you do need people to buy them. But I always tend to sort of shy away from things that sound like conspiracies, that sound like, well, there's a puppet master controlling things. If there's a puppet master, it's the wiring in ourselves. Okay. I have a lot of notes here. So he's talking about our ancestors seeing certain aspects of today as selfish, decadent, and morally corrupt. Consumerism has worked very hard with the help of popular psychology. Just do it, to convince people that indulgence is good for you, whereas frugality is self-oppression. Isn't just do it the Nike slogan? That's talking about just get up and exercise. Maybe he doesn't mean that as a reference. Maybe I'm forgetting the Nike slogan. Okay. So yeah, I like this discussion. I'm saying I see it more like this. We desire. Scarcity makes excess desire dangerous to a group's survival. Therefore, it's something we try to control. We have excess now, so we don't need to control. Now our desires are let loose. Yeah. I mean, that's the way I see it. Like, desire has always been there. It's just that the objects of our desire haven't been so widely available. So then I note, I do think exercising restraint around plenty is a new skill set we need. Again, I feel like I see this play out with food and with things. I can often tell now I, as a parent, say things to my kids like, yeah, well, we can love more things than our house can store. Or, hey, y'all have to develop the skill set of letting things go, of giving things away, stuff like that. Yeah, then he mentions, in the United States, even Memorial Day, originally a solemn day for remembering fallen soldiers, is now an occasion for special sales. Most people mark this day by going shopping, perhaps to prove that the defenders of freedom did not die in vain. And I'm saying, yeah, okay, it has gotten out of control, sure. Later he says, how can we square the consumerist ethic? I noted, I dislike this term. The capitalist ethic of the business person, according to which profits should not be wasted and should instead be reinvested in production. And I make the note again, I would like to replace the word production with good. Let's see. He says, it's simple. As in previous eras, there is today a division of labor between the elite and the masses. In medieval Europe, aristocrats spent their money carelessly on extravagant luxuries, whereas peasants lived frugally, minding every penny. Today, the tables have turned. The rich take great care managing their assets and investments, while the less well-heeled go into debt buying cars and televisions they don't really need. The capitalist and consumerist ethics are two sides of the same coin, a merger of two commandments. The supreme commandment of the rich is invest. The supreme commandment of the rest of us is buy. That reminded me of a man who I was recently exposed to via YouTube on Ellen. You can find him online under Wall Street Trapper. A guy who, after a difficult life and time spent in prison, spent his time in prison learning a lot about finances. And so now his life is dedicated toward educating people about finances. And that is one thing he mentioned, the idea that of being too good of a consumer, of using your money to buy instead of invest. Okay, the capitalist consumerist ethic is revolutionary in another respect. Most previous ethical systems presented people with a pretty tough deal. They were promised paradise, but only if they cultivated compassion and tolerance, overcame craving and anger, and restrained their selfish interests. This was too tough for most. The history of ethics is a sad tale of wonderful ideals that nobody can live up to. Most Christians did not imitate Christ, most Buddhists failed to follow Buddha, and most Confucians would have caused Confucius a temper tantrum. And I just wrote, if only we realized this could give us paradise here. If we behave in those ways, we would have a very nice life here on earth instead of trying to behave in those ways for paradise later. And he's saying, in contrast, most people today successfully live up to the capitalist consumerist ideal. Yeah. This is the first religion in history whose followers actually do what they are asked to do. How, though, do we know that we'll really get paradise in return? We've seen it on television. Okay, that's 20 minutes. We got through another chapter. That's plenty of talking. We'll just have to keep reviewing at a slower pace. Oh, and let me reset the timer. Yeah, so good luck on whatever you're working on. Hopefully you can't hear my swallowing, unless you're an ASMR person who likes eating noises. say I can't wait to get to what I'm reading right now. It's so funny. It really dovetails with just absolutely other content that I'm watching and listening to right now. And honestly, what I was thinking about some on my walk this morning, that there's some wisdom to be had in ignoring your feelings. This is talking about liberalism sanctifies the subjective feelings of individuals. It views these feelings as the supreme source of authority. I think it's a really important topic. to say I personally love a sentence I'm rereading. I've been stuck on one page for a little while. The idea that feelings are not to be trusted is not restricted to Christianity. At least when it comes to the value of feelings, even Darwin and Dawkins might find common ground with St. Paul and St. Augustine. I love that because that's the intersection at which I find myself the most often. I just find a lot of wisdom in a lot of places. And those places often feel separate to me. Well, when and the separateness is what's emphasized when I think there's so much to be gained, so much wisdom in the crossover. Although the place that he says they're crossing over does make me laugh. So the paragraph before is setting up how something you might hear coming out of Christianity is that we're not to trust our own desires. That if we're sinful by nature, that our own desires can't be trusted to lead us to true happiness. And then he's saying that, you know, if Christians are arguing that our desires are manipulated by Satan, Dawkins might argue that our desires are manipulated by our DNA. Because that, again, I've read like the first few pages of The Selfish Gene. But yeah, I know enough to know that the title doesn't mean he thinks we have a gene for selfishness. It means he thinks our genes are the unit, the base, the root of where the decision making happens. So it's the genes that act. It's the genes that act and motivate and change things. Anyway, that they're the unit of change. Yeah, so he said, like Satan, DNA uses fleeting pleasures to tempt people and place them in its power. I might envision more emotional places of crossover than that, but that's funny. I'll take it. Okay, so that wraps up our time for today. Hope you enjoyed whatever you worked on, and I hope to see you again tomorrow. Bye.